Thanks so much, Rob. Hey guys, thanks so much for joining us today. Today I'm going to be going through 10 things I wish I knew before senior year. So, just to get started, I want to kind of give you an overview of what kind of topics we're going to be covering today. So, the first thing that we're going to be covering are the 10 things that I wish I had known when I had entered my senior year. And then we're going to go into a little bit about tips for maintaining relationships, figuring out which extracurricular activities matter, and discovering which schools fit you, which is a really important question that you need to keep in mind as you move forward in entering the college admissions process. So let's get started. 10 things I wish I knew before senior year. The first thing that I wish that I had known when I was entering senior year was that I didn't need to have more than 10 extracurriculars to show my commitment to excellence. I think that when you think about how to get into college and all the college advice that you get from people these days, a common question or consideration that guidance counselors, parents, and teachers all push their students to do is to go ahead and overload on a bunch of extracurriculars because they kind of have grown into this mentality where you need to be a well-rounded student who is involved in service activities as well as athletics and performing arts, along with a lot of different activities. But I wish that I had known earlier that this is actually a bit of a myth. And it's a myth in the sense that you really don't need to have 10 plus extracurriculars to show your commitment to excellence. In fact, a lot of kids these days are getting in with 3 to 5 extracurriculars. So what I mean by that, and I want to go a little bit more in depth about this, is that the kids that are getting into colleges these days don't necessarily have a laundry list of extracurricular activities that they've put down. So even if they are involved in Beta Club, NHS, Model United Nations, orchestra, and a bunch of other extracurriculars, they're able to still get into top colleges with only listing a handful of extracurriculars. And the reason why is because it really follows the commitment and passion mindset of a high achieving or just a committed and dedicated high school student. It's much better to send a signal to the college admissions counselor by saying, hey, throughout my 4 years of high school, I was incredibly dedicated to pursuing horseback riding, or throughout my 4 years of high school, I was committed to varsity soccer. It's important to show that kind of commitment to particular activities because it actually shows to the reader of your application essay that, hey, this kid is actually really committed to actually pursuing and learning and mastering a certain activity. And that shows a lot more of the persistence and effort from a student standpoint than just putting a laundry list of 10 activities. The flip side of that is the argument that when you have a laundry list of extracurricular activities, it can actually cause doubts to be raised about your application. And what I mean by that is if you have 10 extracurricular activities on your resume, it can actually pose the question of, is this kid just listing any activity that he's been a part of, and what actual impact has this kid actually left behind on these organizations? And these are questions that we're going to cover a little bit later on when we think about what activities actually matter and what activities to keep in mind as you move forward in the through your junior year and into your senior year. So the next thing that I want to cover is that I didn't need to get an elite SAT score to get into college. So a little backstory about me. I come from a family of 3 kids. I'm the youngest of 3. I have 2 older sisters, and they both achieved great admission success. They both attended Harvard and Princeton, so naturally I felt a lot of pressure coming from my parents to perform well and get into a great school. But I think looking back at just how I approached the SAT and how I approached preparing for the SAT, I think that I stressed a little bit way too much. And the reason why is because ultimately, if I look back at the hours that I spent, cooped up in my room studying for critical reading or math or the writing section, I guess I realized that while SAT scores matter, they aren't nearly as important as people make them out to be. And I think that this is a mentality that kind of comes back to the 90s when SAT scores were a much bigger emphasis on college application, because back then there weren't that many things in terms of college applications that schools would look at. But nowadays, we're talking about a lot more considerations and factors coming into the picture. So the reality about this thing that I wish I had known before my senior year was that while it's important to do well in the SAT is really just one part of the equation. I ultimately did do well on the SAT, but if I were to look back at my application, I wouldn't say that that would be the reason as to why I did or did not get into a certain school. Ultimately, it came down to more of the subjective parts of my essay, such as my essay and my teacher recommendations and my guidance counselor recommendation, that really were able to help me stand out from the rest of the pack. So something to keep in mind if your parents or if you are feeling a great deal of stress about your SAT score is that while it is important and it's something to keep in mind as you move forward in your junior year into your senior year, the other thing to keep in mind is that there are so many other components of your application that are so much more important. And when you enter your senior year, everything's going to be coming really quickly. And what I mean by that is, you're going to be busy with your senior year things. You're going to be busy with the typical things of a high school senior deals with. You're going to be busy with all of your extracurriculars. So it's really hard to kind of prioritize everything. So the one thing that I would recommend here is, yes, kind of pay attention to your SAT score, but don't think that just because your SAT score is a little bit lower than you think you're capable of scoring, that that'll make or break your application. In many cases, how I recommend with my students is that they fall into at least the mid 50th percentile for the schools that they're applying to. And the reason why I say that is because in that situation, the student is better than at least half of the students that get admitted to that school and attend that school. And at the same time, they're not necessarily at the very top of that school, but there are so many different ways in your application that you can really help yourself stand out from the rest of the applications. So remember, if you are studying for the SAT right now, just keep in mind that it's important to do well on it, but it's really not that important in terms of the greater scheme of things, in terms of your college application. Just to give you a little personal backstory, I had a friend that actually scored a 2400 on his SAT score, and he ended up actually not getting into some of the top schools that he applied to. And I think that that's often a common misconception. Is a lot of students think that if they get a 2400 or if they get above a 2300 that they're guaranteed admission to a school. But what you have to realize is that your score simply means that you did really well on a standardized test one Saturday morning. It typically doesn't really say that much about a student's potential success rate at a university. So just keep that in mind as you move forward. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was this conception that I had that public school students are at a disadvantage to private school students. So I ended up going through K through 12, going to a public school. I never went to a private school, and essentially entering my senior year, I had some friends that went to private schools, and something that I often heard about from them was how they were having all these resources and having all these college counselors slash guidance counselors that were able to help them throughout the process. And I felt as if I was at a bit of a disadvantage in terms of admissions because, in a sense, these people, my friends, were essentially getting more attention than I was necessarily getting at public school. But I think that this was overall kind of a flawed thinking because when you actually look at schools and the students that they accept and don't accept, you'll find that public schools actually have about identical admission rates with private schools. So while private schools may have better funded guidance programs, acceptance rates are essentially identical in terms of applying. So what that means is that if you do go to a public school or if you go to a charter school and your resources aren't nearly as in-depth as a private school may offer, don't feel like you're at a disadvantage when it comes to the overall admissions cycle. I think that's something really important to keep in mind is the fact that college admissions nowadays is a holistic process. And what that means is that the entire sum of every single part of your application is so much more important than one individual part. So when you're thinking about this, that means that a college, when they're looking at applications for students, they are looking for students that fill different areas of their school. They want to create a diverse student body. And on one level, yes, diversity does kind of speak to race and ethnic background, but on a whole nother level, you can talk about diversity in terms of student personalities, in terms of student makeups, and you can just think about what you have to potentially offer to a school. And that's why schools typically don't really show that much bias between private schools or public schools because they want to have students that have had different experiences, learning experiences, and backgrounds coming into their university. So don't feel like you're at a loss or anything. The only main disadvantage that I think that you do have going to a public school, which I experienced personally, was the fact that guidance counselors are a little bit harder to get in touch with. And that's just because of the fact that public school guidance counselors are typically overtasked with students. So the average guidance counselor will have to be the guidance counselors for about 400 to 500 students. So, bear with your guidance counselors. Really try to schedule a time to talk with them, but don't feel like when it comes to actually the make or break, am I going to get in or not going to get in, that going to a public school is going to be a disadvantage for you. So the next thing I wanted to cover, which I think was really important in terms of when I reflected on my application process, was that I didn't need to get a language arts teacher and a math science teacher for my recommendation. So I get this question a lot from students. I actually get it, almost every single week. And the question is typically phrased by stating, I'm thinking about who to ask for my teacher recommendations, and I'm thinking that I should get my English teacher or some humanities teacher and also a math and science teacher so that I can demonstrate that I'm a well-rounded student. And again, I think that this is kind of falling into that trap of the old mentality of what it takes to get into college. Back then in the 90s, schools were advocating that high schools across the nation feed them students that were really well-rounded, students that embodied the epitome of kind of a perfect student. But nowadays it's kind of changed. And so I think that this mentality of needing to get a teacher that is covering the humanities and another teacher that covers the hard sciences or the STEM classes is kind of flawed. And the reason why is because I've realized just through mentoring students through the process, also looking at my own experiences when I was asking for teacher recommendations, that it really doesn't matter who you ask for your recommendation. So the only thing that matters is that this teacher or coach or whoever you're asking for your recommendation helps you stand out from the pack. And typically what that means is that this person has to be someone that you are incredibly close with, someone that knows you beyond the classroom. And so just to give you a little bit of a background behind my story, when I was initially applying to college, I was thinking of getting my English teacher and my history teacher to write my recommendations, mainly because both of them were the teachers that I had the strongest relationships with. And I definitely asked my English teacher, since she was definitely one of the closest teachers I've ever had going through going through school K through 12. But I initially had hesitation about potentially using my history teacher. And actually what ended up happening was I ended up actually changing my mind and asking my biology teacher for a recommendation. And I think that reflecting back on my process, so both of my teachers, my English teacher and my biology teacher, were nice enough to actually provide me with copies of the recommendation. So after the fact, sometimes teachers, if you have a close enough relationship with them, they're totally willing to share with you a copy of the recommendation that they wrote for you. And what I realized just reading the differences between my English teacher and my biology teacher, and just the nature of our relationship. So a little backstory: my English teacher and I have pretty much been really great friends ever since I graduated. I still keep in touch. I do guest lectures there for her all the time, and it's just like it's been a really strong relationship. And so, sorry about that in terms of the screen. But anyways, so it's been a relationship that I've kept up throughout the years. And my biology teacher, I was a really great student in his class. However, I wasn't necessarily that close to him. And what I realized afterwards, just reading both of the recommendations after they had already been submitted, was that I probably would have had a much stronger recommendation had I asked my history teacher. And that's something that I think is really important to emphasize, is that if you have any doubts about asking a particular teacher, such as, if you're thinking about asking your Spanish teacher, but you're also thinking about asking your English teacher, and you're thinking that because you're having already a one language teacher write a recommendation for you, that you shouldn't get another language teacher to write a recommendation for you, just kind of think about who you're closest with. Because at the end of the day, the person that you're closest with is going to be able to write the strongest recommendation letter for you. And that's going to ultimately be the game changer um, behind getting in and not getting in when you're in the case of a tie with another student. So looking back, if I were to go back and redo that process, I definitely would have gone through and followed through with choosing my history teacher just because my history teacher was easily the second teacher that I was closest with. And I think that while my biology teacher's recommendation was strong, it wasn't necessarily a great portrait of in terms of who I felt like I was as a student. So that's just something to keep in mind, is to keep in mind the ability of the teacher to write as well as the closeness of the relationship between you and your teacher. So the next thing I want to cover um, is that alumni interviews can actually tip the scale. So a lot of the times, people are telling students these days that alumni interviews aren't really that important. I mean, at the end of the day, many books out there say that alumni interviews are just a way for schools to keep their alumni engaged and to make their alumni feel important. And while that is true to a certain extent, I think that alumni interviews are a great way to set a first impression. So something I wish that I really knew before senior year that I ended up learning throughout the process was that alumni interviews are a great way to display interest, and a solid impression can help tip the scale. So again, kind of relaying back on my past experiences, when I was applying to a school, I had an alumni interview with an alum, and essentially it went really well. We actually hit it off. We ended up talking for about 2 hours or so. And what I did that I think was really different from most applicants was that I wrote a handwritten thank you note. And so, come the admissions dinner, so essentially every spring, some schools will actually have local dinners for you and your families to kind of mix and mingle with other admitted students. This U Chicago alum pretty much told my parents that of all the students that he interviewed in the past cycle, I was the only student that actually took the time to write a handwritten note, um, thanking him for his time and sharing his experiences at U Chicago. And I think that that was ultimately one of the things that was the game changer for my application, to be honest. Like, I think that in the case of a situation where you're a very competitive candidate, but you've also got a lot of competition, it can be hard to distinguish yourself from the rest of your peers. But the small things really can matter, and the small things can be as simple as, first of all, saying that you are interested in an alumni interview, and also, second of all, actually just learning the experiences of that alumni, expressing gratitude with that alumni for sharing his or her experiences, and just being able to connect with a person that actually had 4 years or however many years at that school to just learn more about the school. So while some books out there will say that alumni interviews aren't of that great importance, I personally believe that alumni interviews can be a game changer because, there are tons of competitive applicants these days. There are 30,000 students applying to all the top schools these days, so you really need to find ways to help yourself stand out. And one great way is to be able to convey your personality to a person that actually went to that school and understands what that school's environment and what that school's students typically are kind of like in terms of their personality. So the next thing is that I didn't need to be as well-rounded as possible to get in. And this kind of goes back to thing number one, which was talking about all those extracurriculars. Something that I learned later on after, starting to help students get into colleges was that some students just have really great stories and they're technically speaking, one-sided students. And what I mean by that is one student might be really passionate about math and keep pursuing math in terms of all of his extracurriculars and all of his competitions and awards and whatnot. And he might be totally lacking on the language arts front. But that's totally fine. And I think the reality here is that being one-sided is okay. It's actually usually better. And the reason why I say that is because when you look at how college admissions officers are assessing applicants these days, they're looking for students that can fill particular niches within a school. So let's say, for example, that we're looking at Northwestern. Northwestern has 6 undergraduate schools. One of them is a school of engineering. And let's say, we're trying to advocate for more women to enter engineering. Well, in this situation, when I'm going through the applications and looking through the 30,000 or so applications that are coming in, I'm going to be paying particular attention to the students that are female that are seriously interested or have demonstrated interest in engineering. So maybe that's, being part of a robotics team or something like that. But the main thing that I'm looking for as an admissions officer in this situation is the student that specifically fits what I need to fill. And what I mean by that is in this situation, we might be looking more for female engineers. So that means that when I'm looking through applications, I'm going to put more weight towards those kind of applicants. And that's something that you want to keep in mind is that, while it's important to kind of have a strong application overall, it's also really important to demonstrate that you are incredibly passionate or committed towards a particular thing. Because what that shows to an admissions officer is that, hey, I have really found something that I really enjoy, and this is something that I think that I can continue through college. And I think that I could contribute to your school community because your school already has this, and I think that I can add this to that particular community. And that's something to keep in mind is that, if you are really strong at English or something like that, but you're not really strong at STEM classes, which is science, technology and whatnot, um, don't feel like you have to hide that fact. If you've gotten B's through high school in math, maybe you're just not strong in math. Sometimes it's better to acknowledge your weaknesses up front than it is to try to act like you're a perfect student. And in many cases, it's that kind of vulnerability that you express in certain aspects of your application that can really, really hit it home with a person that's reading your application. So the next thing is that I didn't need a 5-year plan set in place. So, being a high achieving student going into the college applications process, I like to plan things. I used to have pretty much everything set in place for what I wanted to do with my life entering college. And I think what I realized the second that I landed at Northwestern and started taking courses and joining clubs and whatnot was that so much happens in your freshman year that your goals are constantly changing. So don't feel like you're obligated to sit down one afternoon and come up with what you're going to do in your senior year, what you're going to do in your freshman year, in your sophomore year, whatever. It really, really changes quickly. And just to kind of put it in perspective, I thought I was going to go into iBanking when I was entering college. To be totally honest with you, I didn't even know why I wanted to be an investment banker. And ultimately, when I started talking to people that were in investment banking, I realized just how much my personality clashed with that kind of lifestyle. So I quickly readjusted and explored new things. And I think that's something to really keep in mind, is that you really should keep an open mind when you're approaching both your senior year along with your college experience. Sometimes students don't realize what they want until their senior year of college, and that's totally fine. College is the time for you to really explore the things that you are potentially interested in and to rule out and rule in different kind of experiences. So don't feel like you have to sit down and plan month by month what you're gonna be accomplishing when you're a sophomore in college. You're probably not yet, so don't again like just don't plan too far ahead. Plan for the immediate future and do as well as you can right now and kind of shape your environment to the best of your ability in the current state that it is right now. So thing number 8 is that I wish I had known before senior year was that failure is a good thing, that it's okay to fail. And so I did really well in high school, and I graduated. Um, I was fortunate to graduate at the top of my class in high school, and so I never really faced failure in high school. I got A's throughout high school, but coming into college, I had never really faced abrupt failure. And I think that if I were to reassess my high school experience, something that I wish that I'd done more was just to take more risks. And what I mean by that is to take more chances on things. Take for example, like maybe there's a competition or something like that that I wasn't sure if I would have the time to do it because it would have compromised potentially my A in a certain class. Things like that. I think that what I've realized through running a business as well as going through college and taking courses, adding courses, dropping courses, taking midterms, doing well, doing poorly. Overall, what I've realized is that failure accelerates learning, and that you need to fail quickly to learn faster. And what I mean by that is if you keep on succeeding in life, that's great, but you will learn so much more if you can fail at something and essentially reflect back on that experience and understand why you failed and understand how you can make yourself better. I think that, the definition of failure is subjective to every single individual. So obviously, you'll have a different definition of failure than your best friend or, your mom or your dad. But I think that's something that's really important is to understand that it's okay to not always win. I think that, in the millennials, being like millennials, we tend to be raised in the generation where it's kind of like everybody gets a trophy at the end of the game. But in many cases, it's better to just understand that you might not win in certain situations, but it's from those opportunities where you do fail that you can learn more and actually take away even more from the experience. Because when we do fail, it forces us to really have a moment of introspection where we kind of reflect back on everything that happened, why it happened, and how we can improve from it to the next time. Just think about like when you first rode your bike. You weren't able to ride it the very first time you got on it, but you kept on going back on it, and you kept on training, and you kept on getting better, and that's ultimately the lesson here. So thing number 9 is that you should really focus on the things that you're really passionate about. In my high school experience, I was the kid that was super involved in a bunch of extracurriculars, but I wasn't necessarily passionate about everything that I did. I mean, there are just some extracurriculars that I did because I thought it would look good on a college application. And something I think that you need to realize now before you enter your senior year is that you only get 24 hours every single day. So don't waste your time on things that you don't like to do. This really goes back to cutting down from your laundry list and finding 3 to 5 activities that you're really passionate about. And the reason why is because I think that when you are able to commit yourself to a handful of things as opposed to a laundry list of things, your impact on those organizations, on those teams, on those clubs becomes an exponential kind of return. And what I mean by that is, while you might be putting in 1 hour into Beta Club right now, you might instead, cut out something else and then end up allocating that time back to Beta Club. So then you might be spending 2 hours on Beta Club, and you might be getting more and more interested in terms of bettering your club or organization. And I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind as you cut down your list and really focus on which extracurriculars matter and which extracurriculars don't matter. Because when you are able to identify the things that you really like to do, your effort and your will follow, and with your effort comes passion, and that's how you really convey to a person that you really enjoy a certain activity. So the last thing that I wanted to go over in terms of things that I wish I'd known before senior year was to relax. Everything will work out in the end. Senior year was a super stressful time. It still is, a super stressful time for seniors every single year. And I constantly have to tell them to just relax because, taking time to de-stress is critical for maintaining a high level of excellence. I think that what I've realized going into college and just maintaining uh, the best use of the 24 hours that we have in a day has been that it's really important to cut out the things that don't matter, and it's also really important to just have time for yourself, have time to unwind, and have time to just, reflect on everything that's gone on in a day so that you can better tackle the issue when you return to it. So what I mean by that is, maybe you've studied in the past and you've done a 3-hour study session the day before a history test. But what you'll realize is that, in studying high performers, what has been found is that students that actually study in blocks, so like 1 hour for the 3 days leading up to the exam, actually end up scoring better than a student that studied for 3 hours the night before. And the reason why is because that student takes a very low stress approach, because that student breaks it up into chunks where the stress really isn't that daunting, because as opposed to taking all the stress in one night, the student is spreading it out over a span of 3 days. So that's something really important to keep in mind as you enter your senior year, is that while you have a lot of things to do, it's really important to take time for yourself and to take time to just relax, hang out with friends and enjoy your senior year, because it only happens once. All right, so now I want to go a little bit in depth about tips for maintaining relationships. It's something that you probably haven't, really committed yourself to doing right now, just because seniors students don't typically think about this until their senior year. So what I want to do is give you some tips about how to start creating and building relationships with your teachers and with your guidance counselors. So the first thing I want to kind of convey to you guys is that you should be visiting your teachers and guidance counselors at least twice a month. If you're not already doing this, start doing it now. Guidance counselors have very busy schedules, so it can be very difficult to get in touch with them, which is why it's really crucial that you schedule appointments with them, with the guidance secretary as soon as possible on a regular basis. And the reason why is because no guidance counselor is going to take time out of their day just to call you up to schedule time to talk with you. If you go to a public school, it's just a reality that there's too much that goes on in a guidance counselor's typical day that they don't have time to be seeing all the 500 students. So the only students that they're really seeing are the students that are proactive and seeking their help. In terms of visiting teachers at least twice a month, what I mean by that is, after school one day, just drop by a teacher that whose subject or whose class you really enjoy and just talk with the teacher, get to know them on a more personal level. And the reason why is because if you start doing this in your, sophomore, your junior year, you'll start to build this strong relationship where the teacher knows more about you than just who you are as a student. And that's really important when it comes time to write that letter of recommendation. The next thing is to block off times in your schedule to do so. So, as a student, you're very busy. We all understand that. And, at the end of the day, every single person is busy. Even teachers are busy. So what you need to do is you need to commit yourself to really starting to build this relationship. So whether it's putting in a time slot of 15 minutes every Wednesday afternoon to visit a teacher, or scheduling a specific day of the month to go, it's really important to just create that time block because by putting it down on your calendar or putting it in your planner, you'll actually feel more obligated to follow through with that action, to follow through with that commitment. The next thing is to provide value in return. So teachers and guidance counselors are doing a lot of things for you. They're educating you, but they're also taking time out of their busy schedules to write you letters of recommendation. And what I mean by that is it's not in a teacher's job description to actually write letters of recommendation. They actually do it just because, they really want to help you get into a great school. So something to keep in mind is that there are many ways that you can provide value in return for teachers or guidance counselors. One way might be if you are talking with a teacher about a particular subject area and you end up doing a little bit more research at home and you think that you come across an article that you think would be really cool to share with that teacher, then you might go ahead and send the teacher an email or let her know and let her or him know in school about this article that they can check out, just to kind of refresh their memory on that conversation and also show that you're seriously considering and taking into consideration the things that they're talking about you with, and actually the kind of conveying to them that the conversations that you have are incredibly valuable to you and that you're incredibly grateful for those conversations. The next thing is to make sure that you demonstrate enthusiasm. So, something that's obviously very important as you visit your teachers and your guidance counselors is that you're actually enthusiastic to see them. If you are coming across as forced or you feel as if you're obligated to do this just so that you can get a good recommendation, then you're not going in with the right intention. What you really want to do when you are visiting these teachers and visiting these guidance counselors is to really just demonstrate that you want that you really do value them as educators, but also as people as well. And I think that the human component to things is really important. And that kind of leads us to the last point here, which is to ask for help. This is something that a lot of students struggle with, and even I struggle with it, occasionally. And I think the reason why is because we're raised to believe that asking for help makes us look weak. And in actuality, um, it actually just doesn't. It's actually not true at all. Asking for help actually is, to me, in my opinion, a signal of strength. And the reason why is because it takes a lot of confidence and courage for a person to admit to another person that they don't know everything about a particular subject area. And being willing to kind of put your head down and ask the question because you know that they have the answer really shows something about your character to a teacher or guidance counselor. So don't be afraid to ask for their help. More often than not, they are more than willing to help. And they love answering your questions because, you know, one of the core human traits of just, you know, people is the feeling of importance and being able to share knowledge with others. And so don't feel like, you know, you'll come across as stupid, or, you know, come across as uninformed if you ask for help. Really, it's totally the opposite of that. You know, you'll come across as a very confident and also a very curious student in general. So those are some tips, and then these are some more. So the next thing is to invest time now so that you can have a great return later. So if you commit yourself to 15 minutes, you know, literally 15 minutes a week to visiting a particular teacher, that really adds up. I mean, that's an hour every single month. And what that means is that, you know, come time for your college applications, your teachers are going to have about 10 hours or so with you, more than other peers would have had with you on a one-on-one basis, getting to actually know you as a person, and you actually getting to know them as a person. So again, be really genuine when you do this. Treat them as old friends, and don't be afraid to express gratitude. If, you know, if they do something for you and help you out in some way, don't be afraid to send them to write them a thank you note, to, you know, give them a gift during the holiday season or during Teacher Appreciation Day. Don't be afraid to just reach out to them, ask for help, and learn from them. So now I'm going to kind of go into figuring out which activities matter. And then, you know, we can go into questions after that. So figuring out which activities matter. So in doing this, what you want to do is you really want to prioritize. And what I mean by that is you want to make a list of your extracurriculars and then go ahead and take 10 pennies. And what I want you to do is I want you to take those 10 pennies and allocate them into a maximum of 5 extracurriculars. So take, for example, if I was in band and I wanted to stay committed to band, and I think that band is my most important extracurricular. So in this situation, I might allocate 4 of my 10 pennies to band because I want to allocate 40% of my time to band. So to figure out how to allocate these 10 pennies, you can ask yourself these questions. What has been the most impactful thing I've learned being a part of this organization or club? And the reason why you want to ask this question is because by asking this question, you're asking yourself whether or not you actually derive value from being part of this extracurricular activity. The next question to ask is, has the organization or club helped me develop as a person? This goes along the same lines as the first one, in the sense that it really, really stresses the point that the organization or club or team or whatever that you're doing as an extracurricular activity has to provide value to you. It has to give you something in return for you committing the time to participating in that activity. The next question is, have I left an impact on this organization or club? And the reason why you want to ask this question is because when it comes time to fill out your extracurricular section on the Common Application, and when it comes time to create that supplementary resume, it's really important to demonstrate to admissions officers the impact that you've left behind on the extracurricular activities that you're involved with. So you can be a member in a club, but on a whole nother level, you could have spearheaded the efforts for a fundraising campaign for a service club. So think about what you've done in the particular extracurriculars that you've done, or that you've been a part of in the past, and think about if you've actually left behind an impact on that organization. And the last question is, if I only had 5 hours to allocate for extracurriculars, would I dedicate time for this activity? And the reason why you want to ask this question is because, again, you only have 10 pennies, and that's equivalent to 10% of your time for each one of those pennies. So what that means is that you really want to cut down your extracurriculars, figure out what you like to dedicate yourself to, and stick to that plan. All right, and the last topic before we get into questions is discovering which schools fit you. I'm going to kind of go through this pretty quickly, and if there are any questions at the end of this, I can answer any of those questions. So going to this, the first thing that you want to do is you want to reach out to alumni. So what I usually recommend students to do at the start, as early as possible, is to find alumni from their high school using Facebook or LinkedIn. It's really simple. You can go on Facebook and search, you know, students that go to, let's say, super high school that now attend, you know, Emory University. You can narrow down the search. It's pretty intuitive. It's not too complicated. And what you want to do is you want to send them this following message. Hey, My name is your name, and I'm graduating from Example High School IB program this year. I'm starting to look into colleges and came across the school that you're looking into. I'd like to learn more about schools XYZ. What's your calendar look like this week? I'd love to connect for 15 minutes to learn about the experiences you've had at school. Thank you, your name, your phone number. It's simple as that. You can do this pretty quickly. All you need to do in some situations is just change the first name of who it's addressed to, and you can reach out to a bunch of people that went to your high school that now attend schools that you hope to attend come, after college admissions come out in your senior year. So it's seriously that simple. And I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, isn't that weird? And in reality, it's actually not weird at all. In fact, it's actually weird that you're not doing this because what this does is it creates a way for you to come up with a network of peer mentors, to come up with helpers so that later on in your application process, you will have people to turn to for help on your college applications. So what you want to do next is you want to go ahead and set aside time to connect. So schedule time to connect, prepare your questions, make sure that you ask your unanswered questions. So, sometimes you'll go to a school website and not learn everything that you want to know about a school, so you have some leading questions that you want to ask, and you want to go ahead and take notes as you talk with this person. And then as you close, you want to either ask if you can follow up with future questions or if they have other students that they can connect you with. And the reason why is because let's say you're interested in computer science, but you happen to connect with an English major. That means that you probably would be more interested learning about a computer science experience than learning about the English experience. So, in most cases, college students will have friends that are involved in other majors that will be able to connect you with other majors of your interests. So you want to ask open-ended questions. Some examples might be, what was the main reason you decided to go to X when it came to your decision over, Y? How useful do you think classes have been in terms of preparing you for your career? What has been your favorite class at X and why? What are the biggest weaknesses of X and what are the big strongest traits? So these are just some open-ended questions that really allow the person to share their experiences and share their story. So next you want to follow up with a thank you note. So I typically tell students to follow up a day after they connect, and the reason why is because you really get time to reflect on what you learned from that person. If they agree to answer future questions, you want to go ahead and maintain that relationship and schedule regular checkpoints to talk. And what I mean by that is, it's very similar to the approach with teachers and guidance counselors. Block off a certain amount of time every single month and just connect with these people and learn more and more about a school so that when it comes time to write those supplementary essays about why do you want to attend X school, you actually have a solid answer that most students that are applying won't necessarily have because you have the inside edge. So why does this work? Well, it works for a variety of reasons. One reason is that it's low risk, high return. So while you might feel like it's a little weird to send out a message to a person that you don't really know, what you have to realize is that you really have nothing to lose in this case. The worst case scenario is that this person does not respond to your message, which is totally fine because you literally spent 5 seconds to send that message. And the other thing that you need to keep in mind is that these are people that went to your high school. So when they see that you also go to that high school, there's kind of a connection of common ground in terms of just the willingness to help. The next reason why this works is because it gives an insider's opinion. So when you do research on schools, you'll find that many students will be able to find basic core information like student stats, but they won't be able to find the good and the bad about certain schools. This is your way to learn a student perspective about particular schools that a school tour or a visit to a school might not necessarily give you. Because what you have to keep in mind is that as you are doing on-campus visits, if you do get that opportunity, is that these schools are just as much trying to sell you on their experience as you want to attend their school. So what that means is that obviously they're going to tell you everything good about the school and not necessarily everything that they're trying to improve upon about their school. So you actually find out what you value in a school by doing this. Once you connect with several students from several colleges, you'll start to understand what you really are looking for in a college. And this is what people define as fit, a good college fit. And finally, you kill two birds at once. So you find colleges that fit and you get help for your college applications, because if you maintain these relationships, essentially it leads to a situation where you will be able to reach out to this person later on when you have an essay draft or when you want to get help on a certain part of your common application, and they'll be more than willing to help you out. So just to wrap everything up, in this presentation we covered the 10 things I wish I had known before senior year. And some of those things, the key things to keep in mind were it's okay to fail early, it's okay to fail so that you can learn faster. It's important to cut down your extracurriculars. You don't need to be as well-rounded as they say you have to be, and to just relax, to really de-stress and take time for yourself in your senior year. The next thing that we covered were some tips for maintaining relationships with your teachers and guidance counselors. Then we went into figuring out which activities matter, and that was that activity with, the 10 pennies and cutting down your laundry list. And finally, we discovered which schools fit you, and we're going to do that through reaching out and learning the personal stories about students that went to your high school that now attend a school that you're interested in. So overall, we've covered a lot in this, and I think that there's going to be some questions in regards to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions, and I'm also going to leave my email address for for any further questions if you have any later on. The one thing that I will say is that we teach the one of the top massive online open courses for tackling the common application, college applications, along with financial aid, and that's accessible on Udemy. You can actually access it on our website at collegecrete.com. And what we've done for this webinar for all the guests is we've created an exclusive coupon for 50% off, so you can access the course for just $20, and the code is Zinch, so Z-I-N-C-H, and you can access that and learn more about the college application process, and also ask any questions that you might have particular to your situation. So now I'm going to open up the floor for questions, and yeah, so let's open it up.
All right. Thanks, Will. So the first question we have here for you, um, someone asked, is the alumni interview when a college comes to your school? So can you differentiate kind of between that and interacting or visiting with an admissions officer, and if there's things you should do different or similar?
Yeah, absolutely. So the alumni interview is different from the school visit. So the school visit is when the admissions officer or a representative from a college will actually come and visit your school. And when they do that, that's your opportunity to ask some overall questions with the admissions officer. And the best way to do that is actually wait until the very end of the information session. That way you can get one-on-one time with that counselor and get to understand what they're looking for in a school. So some questions to ask might be, what have been previously, what would have been the previous kind of traits that you found in successful students that go to the school, learning more about the student body so that you can kind of understand the types of students that they are looking for. In terms of the alumni interview, what that is that's typically a one-on-one interview where if the school has that program in place in your local area, the alumni will reach out to you asking if you would like an alumni interview. And what you want to do is you always want to say yes. It never hurts, and it's a great opportunity for you to have some one-on-one time with the person that attended that school so that you can learn their experiences, and they'll also ask you some, overall questions, behavioral questions such as, what you've done in high school, why you want to attend the school, and whatnot. And what happens is at the end of that interview, a few days later, that alumni is going to write up a field report, going to write up some notes and send that back to the college, and that becomes part of your college application for that specific school.
Thanks, Will. What about if a school isn't offering an alumni interview in the student's area? What should they do about that?
Yeah, so in some situations you don't get that opportunity, and the one thing that you could potentially do is you can reach out to your regional admissions officer and express interest in terms of scheduling an interview. And the exception to that is essentially if they do have that opportunity available, what they'll do is they will schedule time for you to have a phone interview with an alumni. So it might not be face to face, but you can still get potentially that opportunity by reaching out to the undergraduate admissions officer at that school. But don't feel like it's necessary for every single school that you're applying to. It's a nice plus to have, but even in my application process, I didn't necessarily have alumni interviews for every single school that I apply to.
Great, thanks. And for some schools, it's not available as well, right? So students should check the schools they're applying to and see if that's an option first.
Right, absolutely. And something to keep in mind is that it's oftentimes the alumni interviews tend to fall into the category of like top 50 schools or so. Those are the schools that actively actually maintain those programs. Oftentimes if you're applying to larger schools, they won't have those programs, and the main reason why is because these schools are seeing upwards of 50,000 plus applications. So it's very difficult to really coordinate all of that with the alumni and keep that going. So if you're applying to smaller schools, you'll tend to get a better response rate in terms of getting those opportunities. But again, it's a great way to just reach out to these alumni, and what you can do is you can just contact the undergraduate admissions office and see if they do offer those opportunities.
And do you need to incorporate the fact that you had an alumni interview into your college application, or will that be noted on their end?
Yeah, so that will totally be noted in your application. You don't need to include that fact at all. It's all part of your application. So essentially, when you submit your common application, the school will create a file for you. You know those manila envelopes. Essentially, within that manila envelope will be a copy of your common application, your transcript, your teacher recommendations, and it'll be everything related to you, essentially. And that's, you know, your opportunity to kind of just be I guess like it's kind of like every single student will get their own folder. And what will go into that folder if you do get an alumni interview is that field report or those notes from that alumni about you. And so when the admissions committee meets up and starts talking about students, what they'll do is they'll go through everything in terms of your folder. So maybe your regional counselor will say, um, this person is a super student, and he also had an alumni interview. The alumni thought that he was really engaging and a very passionate student about X, Y, and Z. It's just a supplementary resource that will be provided into your folder at each respective school.
Great. Generally speaking, what's a good number of schools to apply to? What do you typically see students doing, or what do you typically recommend?
Yeah, so nowadays with the number of applications going up, what I typically tell students is to apply to 8 to 10 schools. And the reason why is if you break down that 8 to 10 schools, you come up with about 2 to 3 safety schools, 2 to 3 matches, and 2 to 3 reaches. And what I mean by matches is, schools that you fall into their stats in terms of what the typical admitted student is like. And then in terms of safety schools, those are schools that your scores and your GPA and whatnot kind of are exceptional in comparison to the typical student body. And then with reach schools, those are schools where your scores might be a little bit lower than the typical student, but you still have potentially a shot at getting to that school. And I think the reason why that approach is so effective is because um, it really doesn't create a kind of a all-in approach where some students will apply to only reach schools and then forget to apply to a safety school, and before they know it, come April, they're not into college at all. And you don't want to create that situation. So make sure that you do apply to 2 or 3 safety schools, get a few matches in there, and also don't be afraid to apply to schools that you feel are potentially much more selective than the other schools that you're applying to. So 8 to 10 is typically a good range to fall into.
What's your philosophy on selecting a major when you apply, or just saying you're undecided or undeclared?
Yeah, so in terms of answering that question on the common application, I tend to tell students not to leave it blank, not to leave it undeclared. It's not going to hurt you if you leave it undeclared, but I think that if you just assess what subject areas you're really interested in, what you'll find is that you probably are kind of at least remotely interested in one particular major in college. And the best way that I typically have found for students to figure out what they want and what they like is to actually go online and search for the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's a personality test that will help you understand who you are as a person, and from that result, you'll be able to search the typical kind of careers that your personality type gravitates towards, and that's a great opportunity for you to learn more about yourself and also to learn about potential majors that you didn't even know about um, by just researching a little bit more about what people with your personality type typically go into.
Okay, great. Um, when getting recommendation letters, the question is, do you have to get recommendation letters from teachers or adults from school specifically? So I guess that could be read two ways. Could you get it from other individuals, or is that a necessary process for all college applications?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of getting, I think that it is important to at least get a teacher recommendation in. It is not required that, that it's not, there's no like rule against getting a person that's not a teacher, guidance counselor to submit a recommendation. But typically speaking, when I'm working with students, what I tell them to do is get two teacher recommendations, and if they are heavily involved with an athletic team or, a performing arts kind of organization, then consider getting your conductor, getting your coach to write a supplementary recommendation that can be added as a third recommendation letter.
All right, great. And final question we had, someone just asked to follow up. What was that personality inventory called? That's
Yeah, it's
Myers-Briggs.
called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. So you can search MBTI test, and it should come up in Google as, it's a pretty standard test that's given.
And what we'll do, everyone, and thanks for all your great questions. What we'll do, everyone, is we will send a follow-up tomorrow with some of this information. We'll send a link to Myers-Briggs. We'll have some information from Will and some more stuff from College Creed, and we'll also have the slides and a recording of this webinar, so you can follow up with it at any time. And we'll have Will's contact information. So if you have any more questions for him, you can fire away. Will, any closing statements?
I think the biggest thing to really hit home is, really, really enjoy your time in high school. It really goes by quickly, and it's really important to just consider what you really value and how you will kind of look back at your high school experience and understand that everything that you do from this point on is kind of the last chapter of your high school experience. And, while that's kind of sad on one front, it's also kind of awesome because it's your opportunity to really make a lasting impact on your community and also to just make an impact on other people. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to face failure, and don't be afraid to cut down on those extracurriculars. I think that's something going back I uh, really would have emphasized with myself, and I think that's just something that's really important to hit home with students is find what you're really interested in and keep doing those things, and don't be afraid to just really pursue only the things that you're interested in.
Great. Thanks a lot, Will. Really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for your time. Hopefully you found this to be valuable, and best of luck in the college application process. Good night, everyone.